Well, here we are with week 14 of fall semester. It's crazy that one more week and this semester is over. It's been a heck of a semester. So this week was a shorter week because it was Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody, which was nice to have a little bit of a shorter week, not have to do quite as much. In the my interfaith class, we basically were talking about like what are things that you could do, what are things you'd like to see done in your community that could help with interfaith, encourage more interfaith opportunities. And so I thought of, and because I teach emergency responder training, that how could I use that as an opportunity to bring more people of different religious backgrounds together. It's actually something I've already started working on, but I'm going to work on doing more of it to encourage more people to be involved in emergency preparedness for our community from different people from different backgrounds, basically. My Mormonism class, we covered a few interesting things today that some of you will probably be familiar with, maybe even grew up through some of these things. So we started talking about David O. McKay and how the church started to move rapidly into this global opportunity. So David O. McKay, heck of a guy. He was an educator. Really nice guy. When people that talk about him say he was a really great guy to be around, really smart guy, very smart in how he thought and did things. He was a little, he loved wearing double-breasted suits. He loved looking certain ways, so he was really sensitive to his image and always trying to make sure he portrayed a good image whenever he went out and did things. He During his time as prophet, we had more commercial airlines take off. We had lots of opportunities for it. Made it easier to go other places in the world. So he was amazed. In fact, David O. McKay was really amazed that he could get on an airplane and fly within a day to most places in the world. And it was just amazing that during his lifetime they went from taking boats to which is weeks to get across even the Atlantic, to having a plane where you could make it by the end of a day. So absolutely fascinating stuff that he saw, and the church took advantage of that opportunity to connect with more people in other parts of the world. In Polynesia, down in Australia, Europe, those places, the church had been growing quite a bit. One area that was a big challenge during David O. McKay's time was Africa. There were actually several people, and when I mean several, there were like really thousands of people in Africa that wanted to join the church. So they were allowed to get baptized and join the church. The church started working with countries in Africa to get more missionaries over there, to have a missionary effort. The problem they ran into is because of the priesthood ban that the LDS Church had since Brigham Young's time. When the saints came across the West, ever since that time, there has been a ban on priesthood. So blacks could get baptized, but could not hold the priesthood. So men could not hold offices in the priesthood, which means no leadership positions. And men and women could not go to the temple to receive blessings of the priesthood. So like sealings, getting sealed to your, having a kid sealed to you, getting sealed to your spouse and your family and things like that. They were not allowed to have all of that. And this, if this is something new that you're just hearing, like I've never heard about this idea of the ban of the priesthood and stuff. Let me give you just a little bit of background. I'll probably have to do a whole video just on this by itself. There's a lot to think about. During the time of Joseph Smith, at the very beginning of the LDS Church, he actually had a black man who was baptized, ordained, and he was made a 70. I think his last name was Elijah. I just forgot his first name. But anyways, he was ordained. And so we had at least one black man, if not possibly two black men, back in Joseph Smith's day that had been given the priesthood. So in Joseph's time, he was okay with blacks having the priesthood. The problem was most everybody else did not like that, and especially people who were not members of the church saw giving blacks the priesthood as giving them more equality. And back then, because of like slavery and other things, that's not what they wanted. In fact, a lot of the philosophy was blacks were descendant of Cain. Cain, if you remember Cain and Abel, Cain's the one that killed his brothers, the first murder in the world, and he was cursed because of it. And there's kind of this notion that's been around since I think 16, 1700s time frame that the blacks descend from Cain, and they are seen as not worthy to hold the priesthood, not worthy to have those kinds of blessings and things. And so that was a main proponent of this. Well, Joseph is like, no, everybody gets equality when it comes to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so he didn't really subscribe to that philosophy. But then later, after Joseph died and Brigham goes west, and everybody else all the saints start going west to the Utah territory, and they start settling there, eventually, state of Utah. As they do this, these questions start to come into play of what do we do with blacks? So Utah entered the U.S. as a slave state because back then they had the Compromise Bill where to get one free state, you had to have a slave state and vice versa come in. So two states had to join the Union at a time, one free, one pro-slavery, one anti-slavery. So because they wanted to maintain the equality of power inside the government for both groups. That was their compromise. And so California and Utah joined at the same time. California was a free state, so Utah joined as a slave state. Slavery was still allowed and was still something that was okay because that was the times. Now, one of the problems we had, of course, is because of the LDS Church was quite liberal. I mean, they were giving opportunities for women to do things in the church, to be more active. There was a lot of things going on, and so the LDS Church was quite liberal at that time, and as far as quite progressive in getting ideas out there that the other churches weren't willing to do. So the challenge is as Utah is now trying to become a state, they're trying to, while they left America saying, good riddance, America, you guys are crazy, you hated us, there's no love lost here as we leave to go worship the way we want to. But then when they tried to get in as a state in the United States, they had to convince the rest of the country that Mormons were just like everybody else. And so they gave on some of those ideas around slavery, the idea of interracial marriage was one that was a big one. That Brigham Young was against interracial marriage. Some of the other early apostles were as well. Some of them were pro-segregation. Even into the 1960s, there were apostles who were pro-segregationists. They were okay with the segregation stuff happening, thought that was totally fine. So there was a ban during Brigham Young's time. He made an edict. He kind of put the policy in place that said, no, blacks are not getting the priesthood. And so there was people kind of forgot the original ideas of Joseph allowing blacks to give the priesthood. And Brigham Young said, nope, Joseph made a mistake. We're going with this. And went with this blacks don't get the priesthood. And it stayed in place until Spencer W. Kimball, which was after David O. McKay. But during David O. McKay's time in office, they were getting inundated with letters from people in Africa going, we want to join. And then they said, okay, we can help you join, and we're there. They weren't trying to encourage a lot of missionary efforts in Africa because of the ban, the things that were going on at the time. So it was a hard time. You had to have, if you were a black person in Africa wanting to join the church, you had to have some serious patience. Like it took years before the church would work with them more. And then the problem was you'd have a bunch of blacks join the church, but none of them could really hold leadership offices. So you had to have whites go over there so missionaries were holding the offices in the ward, like bishop, elders quorum presidency, those kinds of things that required priesthood callings. But then that changed how, the missionaries no longer do mission work, they're running a ward. So it caused some challenges. David O. McKay's philosophy on this was, he struggled with this. he really struggled with this, and he prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for a long time. When can we change this? Because David O. McKay really wanted to give blacks the priesthood, but he wasn't. It's not up to him to unilaterally go against something a previous prophet did. He needs to seek God's will to know when that is going to change. So he was looking at this, and part of the challenge is, in order to hold office in the priesthood, you had to prove that you were not black. Okay, places in Brazil, this is where it really stood up in his mind, is because in Brazil there's a lot of African American influence in Brazil, a lot of interracial marriages and things that happen down there. So you could look not black, but actually have black heritage. And so you had to do genealogy work to prove you weren't black, basically, to get the priesthood. And so that was part of this problem in some of these other countries, was you had to prove you're not black by using genealogy to show, 4 or 5 generations down, no blacks in there. If you could prove that, then you got the priesthood. If you couldn't prove that, then they were hesitant to give you the priesthood. And David O. McKay's philosophy was, why isn't getting the priesthood based on personal worthiness, not heritage? And he tried and tried and tried and tried, to talk to God and get an inspiration, and nothing came during his time. It came later, again with Spencer W. Kimball. One of the things, if you say, well, what was the difference between those two? One of the things that was different was Spencer W. Kimball actually was not just trying to seek revelation himself, but he decided we needed to have all the 12 on this. This wasn't going to be, hey, the prophet gets this revelation, everything's going to change. So he said, I need all the 12 to be on there. And so he actually got them all to fast for a day, at least a day, if not 2 days. They did this big fast and prayer, got together. That's when it hit. That's when they got the revelation, were able to work it out and get it done and be taken care of. So, but it took some time. It was something David O. McKay wanted to do, but couldn't do it. He didn't feel like he had that inspiration. So that's what happened, basically. So interesting challenges the church faced in their growth because of that. Now, we watched another video. I don't know if you realize this, there is a whole genre inside the history idea. So when you think of a history, there's like world history, there's American history, there's different histories of different nations and things, different ways to look at history. There is a thing called Mormon studies. If you Google it, Mormon studies associations, Mormon studies universities, you'll find that there's a lot of universities in America that actually have a Mormon studies department. And these are people within the history department that teach Mormon studies, basically, to teach people about Mormons and Mormonism and historical things and stuff. So Mormon studies is fascinating. Claremont University in California has a tremendous Mormon studies department, and you can watch their videos. If you do Claremont University Mormon studies on YouTube, you can find all their videos from their classes, the presentations that they give, these research projects that they do. It's really cool. A lot of cool stuff out there. We watched 2 of these speeches this week. One of them was on Polynesia and Asia as people were joining the church. Now, Polynesia had a relatively easy time joining the church. We talked about them joining several weeks ago when we went over one of the other books we talked about. Is, in Polynesia, the thing that's interesting is just like the Native Americans, Polynesians were seen as descendants with the Native Americans. Because if you remember in the story, there's Hagoth in the Book of Mormon. He makes a boat and he sells and takes off. They come back for a little bit and then they go back again and then never heard from again as far as the Book of Mormon is concerned. And it is believed that they went and settled Hawaii and then went over to the Polynesian islands. So Tonga, Philippines, that area. So there is a belief that they are all descendants of Lehi. And that makes them easy to fit in the narrative of the Book of Mormon. That, we want to help you see your heritage. You are like the Lamanites and others, and Nephites. So we want to help you bring your heritage in. And so it was kind of easy to help encourage them to come in. Now this change, I had never thought about this before, but this changed quite a bit for China. Okay, here's a challenge with China. China is extremely old. Like they've had writing longer than any other nation has had writing. Like 6,000 years ago, the oldest book ever written is from China. China technologically has been advanced more than the rest of the world for most of history. It's just up until recent couple of hundred years that China's fallen behind in history. Most of the time, they're advanced, more advanced than everybody else. Uh, so the problem in China is they're not tied to anybody in the Book of Mormon. So how do you bring them in? Okay, if we think of the story of Adam and Eve or Noah and his people, where do the Chinese fit in that? We don't know. And because they have such a history that is so much longer than most people's histories, how do you fit them into this story? Because a lot of times we can use the creation myths or these other ancient stories to draw other nations, other types of people into our theology to say, you're a part of us. How do you fit the Chinese in? They're older than everybody else, basically. So sometimes people have to look at like really far back Old Testament ideas to connect them in. We don't know how they fit with like Noah after the flood with his three sons. There's a few people try to put these stories in there, but again, their culture is so old, it's hard to figure out how to fit them in. So they're a little bit harder to come across. So when Chinese look at Mormonism, they see American religion. And depending on how they think of America and Americans' religions, they're either going to look favorably on Mormonism or not. So they're not looking at Mormonism as being different than everything else in America. So it's sometimes hard to get that to work out, basically. In fact, in Taiwan, one of the things that helped a lot of people over there feel comfortable about joining the church is the idea of the law of adoption. So because there's no descendancy through Abraham, like Caucasians say there's descendancy from Abraham, Native Americans, the Polynesians, they all say they're descendants of Abraham. Arabics, the Arab groups are descendants of Abraham. The Chinese, we don't know. So they in Taiwan they use the law of adoption as this idea of, well, when you join the church, you might not be a literal blood descendant, but you are a adopted person into the body of Abraham, his family. So that's helped some of them find inclusion in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So interesting. I'd never thought about some of those ideas, but kind of cool to think about. One thing that's interesting about China, and obviously wasn't brought up in this seminar, but in Hugh Nibley's book, there were Jaredites. He has a couple of articles he wrote about the Jaredites, and in there he talks about how he believes the Jaredites, their journey makes more sense going from the Middle East to the east. They followed the steppe of Asia. They went north and then east and went across the steppes of Asia over to China. That's where they built their boats and set sail for the Jaredites, and then made it over to Americas from there. So he believes they went that direction and has some pretty good ideas and concepts from the Book of Ether that would prove that there's some similarities in cultures and ideas that could show that that's where the Jaredites went. So we could say maybe that's the area they came from. But it's interesting. So there's another video we watched about Latinos and Hispanics and how do they fit in the gospel. Now they're oftentimes seen in kind of this duality. Okay, they're accepted but not accepted. They're accepted because they're seen as from Central America. That's part of the land of the Nephites and Lamanites and stuff, and so they probably have those descendants similar to the Native Americans. So they're part of the family of Lehi to an extent, and that's that they're kind of viewed that way. But their cultures are so diverse down there. When they bring their cultures to America, it's seen as quite a contrast because of how they live and do things, and it's not a bad thing. They've just developed other ways of building their family relationships and their connections and things. So it's hard. Okay. The other problem they have is documented versus undocumented. So this is a big issue. There's a lot of hot button topics on this as well to think about. You know, can you still join the church and be undocumented? Can you still have a temple recommend to be undocumented? Is there, how do you match this up? How do you deal with this? Because obviously living in Mexico is that the conditions aren't really conducive to a good positive life. Their income's down. It's better to be an illegal in America and send money home than it is to live in Mexico for a lot of people. That's what they're thinking, and you can't blame them. You can't. I mean, really, regardless of what you think about the whole immigration policy, and realize from a political standpoint, immigration will never be solved because it is too big of a political weapon. Neither party wants to solve it because they use it to beat the other party up and win elections. So it'll never be solved. Why would they ever give up their best weapon? Okay, same with Second Amendment rights, those kinds of things. They're political weapons. Our political party will never solve those problems. They'll just push hate against the other party through those policies, ideas. So if your main philosophy of immigration comes from politicians, you're not actually understanding all the facts that go into it. And you need to be careful with that. No, it doesn't matter which party you're a part of. They both use it as a weapon to beat up the other party. And that's why it'll never be solved, because they're not trying to solve it. They're trying to they're trying to stir you up for votes, not trying to solve the problem. So, and this again puts Hispanics in a bad spot because they get vilified for coming over the border and being illegal in America, but yet they're just looking for better life. They're looking for improvements. Being illegal in America still is better than being being in Mexico and some of those other countries. So there's a problem there. Okay, they want to belong. They want to be a part of something, but what they have down there isn't worth being a part of in some respects. And because there's government corruption, the drug lords and things, so there's a big challenge with that. So they're kind of stuck between these two worlds types ideas, and so it was really interesting to hear some of the perspectives of members of the church and some of the debates and things that they've gone through. It was a good thing to watch. So um, I didn't have anything from my graduate class this week. Because we're just reading books and we usually meet to read those books, and we couldn't meet because that was on Thanksgiving. So next week we'll be finishing up this final book, and I'll talk about that next week. So a little update on my paper. I'm almost done writing it. I've got to get it done next week and get it finished up. So I'll do a whole video just on that paper. So I'm researching the articles of faith, like I talked about last time, of how did they get received. So I'm looking at general conference talks. When were each article of faith used in a general conference talk, and how were they interpreted? So what can we understand about the articles of faith by looking at how they were used in general conference? Now this paper is only 20 pages long, so I could only write about article of faith number 1. I picked article of faith number 1 because it's the first one. So I started the first one, and I don't have enough room in this paper to put the rest in. And yes, that means 16 to 20 pages is what this paper has to be. So I've done some introduction at the beginning about a little bit about the history of the Articles of Faith, some really interesting ways they got used in the early days. It's been fascinating, really fascinating what I've learned there. And then how did Article of Faith number 1 get used? How did the apostles use that through their general conference topics? And it's fascinating. There's some cool stuff. There are some decades they didn't even refer to Article of Faith number 1. There's other decades where they refer to it a ton. So what makes the difference? I've been looking into that, and I'm going to talk about that in my full report when we do that one. So some interesting stuff going on around the Articles of Faith. And I'll make that its own video. And some of you have said that would be you're interested in that research, so I'll give that to you. So probably the next week or the week after that, we'll see. But next week is it, final week, and then we'll have. I'm not going to take any time off of making these videos because I've got other. I want to start introducing you to the books I've got to read for next semester. So next semester, just to give you a heads up, I have 3 classes. I'm taking another interfaith level 2 class. I did an interfaith level 1 class this semester So I'm doing the level 2 class next semester to keep studying interfaith. There's three levels, and I'm going to go through all three to get the certificate. And then I am taking what's called a senior seminar class. So senior seminar is kind of it's a way to kind of take a bachelor's degree level classes like your undergraduate stuff and kind of pull it all together and help get you thinking about research, how to do research, how to do more things to prepare you for graduation with your bachelor's and start thinking about masters, going on to graduate school, which I'm going to do anyways. So it's a class that is a must take class, and so I'm going to take it and get that requirement done. It sounds like it's going to be a fun class to take as well. So I'm really looking forward to that one. My third class is Old Testament. We're going to study the Old Testament for 15 weeks, just get right into it. So it's going to be fun. If you've watched any of my Old Testament videos, there's probably some stuff that we might learn and talk about in there as well. So those are the 3 classes I have coming up. Once this semester's done, I'll start talking about all the books I've got to read for that semester and discussing those with you as well. So if you want to follow along or get some of the similar books, you can. So thanks for watching. Hope you had a great holiday, and I look forward to seeing you next week.